Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the wild, weird, and wacky world of the Word. Yeah, it seems like so often where we get ourselves into trouble, so to speak, when we're looking at Scripture. And I don't mean bad trouble, I mean we're kind of scratching our heads like, what's this all about? And I don't understand this. It has to do with translating some of these ancient Hebrew words into our own vocabulary, our English. And it's difficult because sometimes we just don't know. And a good example of that is our scripture reference as our Old Testament reading this week, which is from the 35th chapter of Isaiah. Now, the 35th chapter of Isaiah is one that brings hope to the people who are in exile and says, things are going to turn around and it's going to be great. And I want to read the very last couple of verses because that's where the issue comes into play. This is what the prophet says. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. For waters shall break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. Now pay attention to this part. The haunt of jackals shall become a swamp. The grass shall become reeds and rushes. That is the part that's a little bit difficult, and we don't know quite where to go with it. Now, I was reading from the Revised Standard Version, but there's a footnote that ending part can also be translated like this, especially the part that says, the haunt of jackals shall become a swamp. You could also translate that, the haunt of jackals is her resting place. What? Swamp? Resting place? That didn't seem to make any sense to me. How about you? So, well, here's what's interesting about this. When our Revised Common Lectionary people all got together to put together our scriptures in the 3-year cycle, they decided just to leave that part of the verse out altogether. It's so difficult to get a handle on, and they also think that, well, people will just misunderstand what's going on, and they'll just kind of lose the whole flow that this is going to be a wonderful, wonderful thing. Well, if we go to other translations, sometimes it's a helpful thing. The Jewish Publication Society, when they came out with a tonic, their Bible, it's made up of some of the best Jewish scholars that represent all of Rabbinic Judaism in the United States. And they came out with a translation, and here's what they said that reads: the home of jackals, a pasture, the abode of ostriches, reeds and rushes. Even that's a little bit different, especially that first part, the home of jackals, a pasture. So far we have a swamp, we have a pasture, we have a resting place. So what is it? Well, what you have to do is remember one thing. Sometimes Scripture helps to interpret Scripture. Go back to the previous chapter, chapter 34. That is a rant by the prophet Isaiah against all those nations that have come up against Israel. And it talks about their utter destruction and what the land is going to look like whenever God takes care of them. And if you go to, I have to get it here now, verse 13 of chapter 34, here's what it says is going to happen to that land. Thorns shall grow over its strongholds, nettles and thistles in its fortresses. It shall be the haunt of jackals, an abode for ostriches. Okay, so now we begin to understand a little bit what's going on here. When you talk about jackals and ostriches, you're talking about a pretty nasty land to live in. Who wants to be there? Nobody wants to be there. It's just utterly ugh. So when God makes everything right again and brings hope and healing to the people of Israel as they return home from exile, what are you going to have? You're going to have a resting place. You're going to have a pasture. And that abode of the ostriches is now going to be reeds and rushes. In other words, it's not going to be habitable for the ostriches anymore. See, now it all comes together. So, maybe, just maybe, our Revised Common Lectionary folks, they didn't have to leave that out. We can figure it out, can't we? Sometimes it's a little difficult, but we will still get there. The point is, God, in the end, is going to make all things right. Blessings be with you on this wild, weird, and wacky World of the Word Saturday.